A bright new face. The fluorescent hum of the faculty lounge did little to soothe Miss Elena Rodriguez's frayed nerves. Her throat still ached, a phantom reminder of the pressure that had nearly choked her. Principal Thompson had been sympathetic, but his assurances of handling it internally rang hollow. Elena needed more than sympathy, she needed justice. She traced the rim of her cooling coffee mug, the ceramic cool against her fingertips. Suddenly, the door swung open, and a woman with a no-nonsense bow and eyes that sparkled with intelligence entered. "Miss Rodriguez?" she asked, her voice firm but not unkind. "I'm Sarah Chen, the new district's legal counsel. Principal Thompson asked me to come speak with you." Elena's spine straightened. This was it. A professional, a lawyer, not just another administrator. "Thank you for coming, Miss Chan," Elena said, rising to offer a handshake. Sarah's grip was surprisingly strong. "Please, call me Sarah," she replied, pulling out a chair opposite Elena. "I've reviewed the incident report. This Kevin, he's a student, correct?" "Yes. Kevin Miller." Elena's voice was steady, belying the turmoil within. "And it wasn't just an incident. He assaulted me." The word felt powerful, definitive. Sarah nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering. "Indeed. And you responded, defensively." A hint of a smile touched her lips. "I understand you have some rather specialized training." Elena felt a blush creep up her neck. "Krav Maga. For self-defense." It was an instinct. Sarah leaned forward, her expression turning serious. "Good. Because we're not just going to handle it internally, Miss Rodriguez. We are going to address this. And we are going to ensure no teacher ever faces this kind of threat again." Elena felt a surge of hope, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. This wasn't just a lawyer, this was an ally. The shadow in the classroom. The fluorescent lights of the science lab hummed, a flat, sterile sound that did little to calm Miss Elena Ramirez's frayed nerves. Today was the day for the annual science fair presentations, a day usually filled with the exciting chaos of bubbling beakers and whirring contraptions. Instead, a thick, uneasy silence permeated the air, punctuated only by the nervous shuffling of students. Mateo, his eyes darting around the room, picked at a loose thread on his sleeve. Across the aisle, Sarah clutched her notebook like a shield. Miss Ramirez scanned the room, her gaze lingering on the empty chair at the back. Brad. He was late, again. A familiar knot tightened in her stomach. She knew his parents were powerful figures in the community, but his escalating aggression in her classroom was becoming unbearable. Just yesterday, he'd subtly tripped Mateo, smirking when no one saw. Suddenly, the door burst open, slamming against the wall. Brad stood there, a sneer twisting his lips, his eyes fixed on Miss Ramirez. He sauntered to his seat, kicking a backpack out of his way. The tension ratcheted up another notch. Miss Ramirez took a deep breath, trying to project an aura of calm she didn't feel. "Brad, you're late," she stated, her voice even. He ignored her, pulling out his phone. "Whatever, teach," he mumbled, loud enough for everyone to hear. A flicker of anger ignited in Miss Ramirez, but she suppressed it. Not now. Not in front of the students. She focused on the first presenter, but her peripheral vision remained acutely aware of the shadow Brad cast, a growing menace in the bright, sterile lab. The air crackled with an unspoken threat. A mean joke. The acrid scent of formaldehyde still clung to the air from the morning's dissection, a fitting backdrop for the tension that crackled in the lab. Marcos, a hulking figure even at 17, leaned against a workbench, his sneer a familiar sight. "Look at her," he muttered, loud enough for a few snickering boys to hear. Miss Elena, so prim and proper with her ethnic flair. Elena, meticulously checking a microscope, felt a familiar prickle of irritation. She ignored it, focusing on the slide. "Marcos, if you finish your observations, you may begin your sketch." Her voice, though calm, held an edge. He sauntered closer, his shadow falling over her workstation. "Or what, ma'am? You give me a stern look with those big, brown eyes?" His hand shot out, not toward her face, but a lightning-fast grip around her throat. It wasn't a stranglehold, more a display of dominance, a crude, mocking gesture. The air in the room thickened, silence replacing the usual lab chatter. A jolt of primal instinct surged through Elena, an electric current of honed reflex. Her peripheral vision registered the surprised widening of Marcos's eyes, the slight shift in his weight. The memory of Sensei Miguel's calm voice echoed, "Control the center, control the attack." This wasn't just a rude boy, it was an active threat, a line crossed. Her muscles tensed, not in fear, but in anticipation, a cold, calculated readiness. The warmth of his thick fingers against her skin was a stark contrast to the icy resolve setting in. A quiet talk, ignored. The fluorescent hum of the empty science lab felt louder than usual, a stark contrast to the thrumming in Miss Elena Rodriguez's ears. She watched Mr. Harrison, his back to her, meticulously cleaning the whiteboard, erasing the remnants of their shared lesson. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken words. "Harrison," she began, her voice a low, steady current, "we need to talk about what happened yesterday." The squeak of the marker against the board faltered, then resumed, a little slower this time. He didn't turn. "Nothing happened, Miss Rodriguez," he replied, his tone flat, devoid of inflection. The scent of isopropyl alcohol mingled with the faint metallic tang of the lab. Elena's fingers curled, a subtle tension tightening her grip on the worn leather of her satchel strap. She remembered the cold press of his fingers against her throat, the sudden, shocking constriction. "Don't make me repeat myself," she warned, a steel edge beneath the calm. "Your behavior was unacceptable. Your comments were unacceptable." He finally turned, his gaze meeting hers, but it was like looking at a wall. His eyes held no remorse, only a simmering defiance. He wiped his hands on a rag, folding it precisely. "I was simply expressing my opinion," he stated, his voice now carrying a dismissive wave. "Some people are too sensitive." Elena felt a prickle of heat rise within her. He was ignoring her, not just the words, but the gravity of the situation, the violation. The quiet talk she'd hoped for was being trampled underfoot. He took a step towards the door, ready to leave, his back once more to her, leaving her with the hum of the lights and the bitter taste of his dismissal. The lab incident. The pungent tang of formaldehyde hung heavy, mingling with the metallic scent of old equipment. Leo, still seething from Miss Chavez's earlier lesson on cultural appropriation, watched her lean over the dissection tray, her dark hair a sleek curtain around her face. He felt the familiar surge of entitlement, the need to assert his dominance. When she turned to retrieve a scalpel, he saw his chance. His hand shot out, seizing her throat, the rough fabric of her blouse scratching his palm. "Think you can talk down to me, señorita?" he snarled, his voice a low, ugly growl. A sudden, sharp pain flared in his wrist. Miss Chavez's eyes, moments before calm and focused, were now alight with a fierce, cold intensity he hadn't seen. She twisted, her movements fluid and impossibly fast, and his grip shattered. He stumbled back, clutching his throbbing wrist, a gasp torn from his lips. The air in the lab crackled, not just with chemicals, but with a raw, undeniable power. He stared at her, his bravado evaporating like mist, a primal fear coiling in his gut. The scalpel, still in her hand, glinted under the fluorescent lights. Her stance was unyielding, her breathing steady. The bell for lunch shrilled, but no one moved. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the frantic pounding of Leo's own heart. He swallowed hard, the taste of fear bitter on his tongue. This wasn't the meek teacher he'd envisioned. This was something else entirely. The grip. The laboratory hummed, a low thrum against the sudden, sharp silence that descended. Miguel's eyes, usually alight with scientific curiosity, were now narrowed, fixed on Maria. His hand shot out, not a playful gesture, but a deliberate, crushing grasp on her throat. Her breath hitched, a faint gasp caught before it could fully escape. The metallic tang of fear pricked at the back of her tongue, but it was quickly overshadowed by something far older, a coiled tension she'd learned to control. "You think you can just waltz in here?" Miguel sneered, his voice a low growl, his grip tightening. The fluorescent lights glinted off the sweat on his forehead. Maria's vision swam for a second, the edges blurring, but her mind sharpened. She registered the pressure, the angle of his thumb against her carotid, the rigid set of his jaw. It was a classic chokehold, poorly executed. A cold calm settled over her. This wasn't a classroom discussion. This wasn't a debate about isotopes. Her training kicked in, a lifetime of instinct honed to a razor's edge. She felt the subtle shift in his weight, the slight imbalance he'd created by leaning in too far. Her left hand, deceptively relaxed, began to move, a microadjustment of her elbow. She met his furious gaze, her own eyes now devoid of fear, replaced by a steady resolve he clearly wasn't expecting. The air crackled with unspoken challenge, a silent promise that this was about to go very differently than he'd imagined. His knuckles whitened, but the real fight hadn't even begun. Quiet strength unleashed. The harsh fluorescent lights of the science lab hummed, amplifying the sudden, terrifying silence that fell after Mr. Harrison's hand closed around Mrs. Delgado's throat. A collective gasp rippled through the stunned students. Miguel, usually the class clown, looked like he'd seen a ghost, his eyes wide and unblinking. Maria, always a quiet observer, instinctively reached for her phone, her fingers fumbling with the screen. Mrs. Delgado's initial surprise flickered, replaced by an unnerving stillness. Her eyes, usually warm and expressive, hardened to obsidian. Harrison, fueled by a toxic brew of anger and prejudice, leaned closer, his breath hot against her face. "You think you can just waltz in here?" His voice was a guttural snarl. Then, it happened. Not a scream, not a struggle, but a precise, almost fluid movement. Her right hand shot up, not to claw, but to grasp his wrist, her thumb pressing firmly into a pressure point. Simultaneously, her left elbow drove upward, not with brute force, but with a calculated trajectory. A sharp crack, barely audible over the sudden intake of breath from the students, echoed through the room as Harrison's grip loosened. His eyes widened, not in anger, but in shock, then pain. He staggered back, clutching his arm, his face contorted. Mrs. Delgado stood perfectly still, her chest rising and falling evenly, her gaze unwavering. The air crackled with a new, potent energy. The bully had found his match. Aftermath and understanding. The laboratory air, still thick with the acrid scent of scorched chemicals and fear, felt strangely still. Elena's hand, though no longer encircling Daniel's throat, tingled with residual adrenaline. He lay sprawled, a grotesque tableau of surprise and pain, his eyes wide and unblinking. The other students, previously frozen in various states of shock, now stirred. A nervous murmur rippled through them. Elena, her breathing finally evening out, scanned their faces. Confusion, fear, and a dawning respect flickered across their features. No one dared meet her gaze directly, yet no one looked away either. Someone called for help. Elena's voice, though firm, held a tremor she fought to conceal. She knelt beside Daniel, checking his pulse. It was erratic but present. The sheer audacity of his attack still sent shivers down her spine, but the primal satisfaction of her swift, decisive counter was a potent counterpoint. He had underestimated her, profoundly so. The irony was almost humorous. Mr. Henderson, the usually unflappable science teacher, finally found his voice. "Miss Ramirez, what just happened?" His eyes darted between Elena and Daniel's supine form. Elena rose, her posture regaining its usual composed authority. "Self-defense, Mr. Henderson. He attacked me." Her gaze swept across the students again, lingering on a few who had witnessed the initial assault. "Does anyone disagree?" Silence, heavy and absolute, was their answer. The flickering fluorescent lights seemed to hum a new tune, one of shifted power dynamics and unexpected strength. Daniel's low groan was the only sound that dared break the spell. A new kind of hero. The bell's shrill cry still echoed in Isabella's ears as she surveyed the empty lab. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of chemicals, a stark contrast to the sterile calm she usually fostered. Marcos had been a storm, loud and unpredictable, but today he'd been something else. His grip on her throat, a sudden, horrifying vice, was a memory that prickled her skin. She ran a hand over the faint red marks on her neck, a phantom pressure lingering. The students had scattered, a flurry of panicked whispers and slammed doors. Only Mr. Henderson, the janitor, had lingered, his eyes wide with disbelief as Marcos stumbled out, a strange, guttural cry escaping him. Isabella knew, with a chilling certainty, that this wasn't over. Marcos's taunts about her place and his crude assumptions about her heritage were merely symptoms. There was a deeper malice festering within him, a venom she'd glimpsed in his eyes just before she'd flicked him. She hadn't used her full force, hadn't wanted to escalate it further, but the surprise on his face, the sudden, undignified collapse, was a small victory. Later, in the quiet solitude of the staff room, Mr. Harrison, the principal, cleared his throat. "Isabella, about what happened?" He looked uncomfortable, his gaze flickering from her to the chipped coffee mug on his desk. "Marcos's parents are influential. We need to handle this delicately." Isabella met his gaze, a steel core humming within her. "He assaulted a teacher, Mr. Harrison. In front of other students." Her voice was low, but firm. "Delicacy won't teach him a lesson. It will only embolden him." She knew her words were a gauntlet thrown, challenging not just Marcos, but the unspoken rules that often protected the privileged. The principal's sigh was heavy, but in his eyes, a flicker of something new, perhaps respect, perhaps apprehension, began to stir.